Hello and welcome to the Honest Not Perfect podcast. My name is Suzanne Ellingham and I'm the director of Source Events, the platform that helps connect retailers, brands and wholesalers to manufacturers and makers globally.
And my name is Jack Stratton. I'm director of Insider Trends. We are a global retail trend spotting agency helping brands to spot what's coming next.
Hello and welcome to Honest Not Perfect, where we, myself and Jack Stratton, sit down with people within our sector who are passionate about responsible sourcing, retail, sustainability, just about everything in between. Today, we're joined by Mark Sumner, who is Programme Lead for WRAP's activities to improve sustainability in textiles. Now, Mark's worked in textiles and clothing for over 25 years. Interestingly, he spent 15 years working in product development, supply chain sustainability within retail before jumping ship and spending 10 years in academia, which, amongst many other things, was a lecturer at Leeds University in sustainable fashion, completing research in consumer behaviour, modern slavery, microfibres and garment durability. The reason I mention that is it's quite unusual for us to speak to somebody who's been in academia and also come from retail, so you've got those two perspectives. Currently, Mark's work includes developing the strategy for Textiles 2030, which is the UK industry's initiative to reduce GHG emissions, water footprint, and importantly, to create a pathway towards circular textile system. Mark, just a few important jobs there, but welcome.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
First question, what made you take the leap from retail into academia? What made you swap ships, so to speak?
That's a good question to get started on.
I thought so.
Yeah. My career path is quite eclectic, and I don't know half the reasons why I've done stuff. But moving to WRAP from academia, quite a clear outcome I was looking for, which was impact, change. So been involved in textiles and sustainable textiles for too many years. Done the commercial stuff, done the academic stuff, and realised we were just running out of time. And I'm also running out of time. I'm getting old.
We are.
And I wanted to get to somewhere where we would have real impact and drive change.
Yeah.
And that's it's a personal aspiration for me, but it's also the same for WRAP. We've got over the past few years, WRAP have got new chief exec, new directors, and we're talking about 10xing our impact. Yeah. How do we get a tenfold increase in our impact without 10 times the effort? We want to be cleverer, we want to be sharper in terms of doing that. And when I heard about the role and the 10x component of that, I just thought that lines up. So I feel like I've done the Holy Trinity now. I've done commercial, academia, and now I'm doing NGO world. So I don't know if I get a gold badge for that or not.
All that's left is sort of retirement eventually.
Yeah.
Need to get to your 10x first.
Yeah.
Mark, I'm really interested. I'm particularly interested in anyone in retail, in product development, where they've been in the industry for a long time, because going back to those earlier days, product development, how early So I know you had different roles, but how early were you in your role talking about sustainability, and how did that look back at the beginning? So I always think that's so interesting.
I think we were talking about sustainability without actually knowing it. And we're talking about 1997, 98, the glory years. And, we were talking about developing really durable, functional product. And if you just think about that as a component of sustainability now, durability, functionality, making sure the garment does what it's supposed to do, that is critical to sustainability. And we'd have conversations around things like dye houses being compliant to chemical management requirements. Back then, that was pretty...
It's quite a new conversation.
Yeah, quite a new conversation, but also quite shallow in hindsight. But it was those sort of conversations that we're having. And, I remember going out to garment factories and doing audits, ethical audits, on a framework that was really embryonic and really new. And we weren't going, there's our sustainability strategy on all of these different things. We were just going, well, that seems like the right thing to do. That's the right thing to do. And I was lucky at the time. The organisation I was working for was doing well. So we had resource to throw at these things. So yeah, all the way back then, we were doing stuff, but it wasn't under that banner of sustainability.
Yeah, because now, I mean, it's an obvious point to make, but it seems like so many people whose job is very specifically under the umbrella of sustainability have gone through years and years of challenges, different jobs, different positions, and they are often back at the point of going, right, yeah, the most important thing is product durability. And you were just doing that, or you were focused on that. And that's fascinating, isn't it? Because actually because I was thinking about circularity, and actually, yes, it's very much something you work in and how important it is, but we don't need to even start talking about it if the product isn't good enough.
It's not good enough in terms of that very physical durability, absolutely. So we were, it was my job to make stuff bulletproof back in those days. We weren't interested in how attractive it was or how fashionable it was. And that's the added dynamic now. The physical durability of product actually is relatively easy to build into the product if you know enough textile science. And I just love to talk about textile science, but we haven't got enough time to do that. But the other component to this is thinking about the relationship that we have with our clothes. So this isn't just about fashionability, but that plays an important role in it. So this idea of durability is that physical, how long would it last if we keep rubbing it and abrading it, but also how do we make sure that you wear that garment for as long as you possibly can? And that's about a very personal relationship that you have with that garment. So we call that emotional durability. And that is...
I wonder if you just used the words there, how long can you wear it? So how long do you want to wear it before you get bored of it? And I feel like that's probably the really big challenge with durability, because you can make clothes that will last, but how long will the consumer want to wear the same thing for?
Absolutely. And when we started working on this physical durability, the pushback was this emotional durability. How do we make that person wear that garment for as long as possible when they actually fall out of love? And we use that term, fall out of love with the garment. Because when you fall out of love with it, it goes into the cupboard, into the drawer, sits there for months, if not years. A while, absolutely. And that's probably the very worst thing you can do with your clothes. We'll probably come back to that in a second, I guess, won't we? But this idea of, we got really stuck with, how do we make you, the first purchaser of that garment, wear the garment, to actually now thinking about, actually we don't need to force that person to wear the garment. We make it durable, and then if we can find a way of making that connection last so they stay in love with it for as long as possible, brilliant. But if not, if we recognise that consumer behaviour is complex and they will fall out of love with it, how do we find the next person to be another person that falls in love with it? And it's building that structural approach to say, let's understand consumer behaviour, this really complex stuff, and it's almost impossible for us to change that. So let's go with the roles and the flow of that behaviour and try and fit the system around them rather than the other way around.
That's really brilliantly put. It's so interesting. And it also reminds me of something recently that's emerged. And it isn't really anything new, but people are talking about it like it's a slightly new thing, which is, you've probably seen this, Suze. Seen a lot on TikTok and Instagram. Suddenly, the kind of real cutting-edge fashion moment has been around the almost like the most sort of dad-looking North Face fleeces. And not new ones. This is an important part of that trend. It will be people raiding their parents' cupboards and finding the scratchiest rubber. I live in Brighton. You go to Brighton, and the front of every single second-hand shop, Patagonia, like really worn, grubby-looking Patagonia North Face fleeces. Some of them are really expensive because it's not just a performance thing. It's not just, they're still going. It's like the older it looks, the cooler it is, the sexier it is, the more fun it is. So and it makes me think of that term. It's emotional durability, because these young people are wearing it as a statement that says, not only does this last, that's my identity. I want to kind of show the world that actually I don't want a new Patagonia thing. I want a really old one, and I want people to know that it's old and worn, and even when they're wearing it the first time. And so it's amazing how that can actually come back. And, whoever made that Patagonia fleece 30, 40 years ago, not talking necessarily about sustainability, just talking about durability. And here it is again.
But I wonder if that leads, you were talking before about consumer behaviour and how it's really difficult to impact. And I speak to some sustainability purists who go, no, we should just stop producing everything. Like, we've got too many clothes. Should people just, realistically, if you're interested in sustainability, just never buy anything new? We are never going to get to that stage, unfortunately. I think consumerism and this need for newness has been bred into consumers, since the 80s at least, since mass consumerism started. So it's how do we start to train kind of the younger generation coming through, or these kind of younger consumers, to want the second-hand stuff more than they want the fast fashion stuff. And one of my friends, Charlene Herlock, she runs Swappers, and this is one of my favourite things. It's basically an online swap shop for kids' clothes, and she's been going to like primary schools and doing swap events, and she's even got her own Girl Guide swap badge now. So they've partnered with some really cool organisations, but it's helped those kids who constantly want something new, and also in places where, you know, kids grow out their clothes really quickly, where they can just swap them and they get a new outfit, or they get a new party outfit, and it's sociable. And I love it. And some of the data points that she's got out of it, and the way that it's just changing those attitudes towards new versus pre-loved, is amazing. And you're seeing such a difference because of activities like that.
Yeah, and you know, I'm not. So there's always this challenge of I think in the world of sustainability, and in particular fashion, of going, there's the solution, a solution, it's secondhand or vintage. But the fashion industry, you know, for thousands of years, has been about fashion is very much segmented, and it's very much about there's no one size fits all. And it struck me a few years ago where you were just like going, here's the fashion industry with all these different segments and all these different ways of doing interaction with consumers, delivering satisfaction for different needs. And you know, satisfaction and needs, these are very sort of psychological terms that we use. And the reality is, sustainable fashion, because it's got fashion in the name of it, has to be built around segmentation. So one solution for one person or one group, if it works, brilliant, fantastic. But it doesn't necessarily mean that that is going to fit for someone else. So there's a couple of I guess challenges to the examples you're giving. Not to say they're wrong, but just to say, okay, we might need to think about this in a slightly different way. If everyone stopped buying clothes tomorrow, there are at least 400 million workers, mostly in the global south, who are reliant on fashion for their income, for their families' income. So we've got a challenge there of going, okay, if we turn that off, what do we put in its place? How do we support? And then there's a from a psychological point of view, I guess is the right way to say it. There will be people in the UK from socioeconomic background who have spent their whole life growing up having hand-me-downs. Psychologically, they do not want to have hand-me-downs again.
No.
Their aspiration will be, I want to break out of that and I want to be able to buy new and not have second-hand anymore. So again, you know, you have these contextual issues that go around these decisions. I mean, I famously said to one of our Textile 2030 signatories, I don't buy second-hand clothing. And as I said it, I realised I was talking to someone that trades in second-hand clothing. And I was nearly strung up. But I justified it in the sense that I wear my clothes until they literally fall apart. I'm doing quite well today that I haven't got holes in my gear. I dressed up for you guys, even though it's,
you knew there was camera.
But also I'm going to let you into a bit of a secret. I've got a bit of a weird body.
Okay.
I've got legs that are longer than my body.
I have that as well.
Do you? Yeah. So it's interesting. So I think I'm a 33.5-inch leg, right? And trying to buy a pair of trousers, new trousers, is almost impossible. You know, I find it really difficult to get the right leg length.
Well, this is amazing.
You need a relationship with a tailor, guys.
Yeah, we're an undiscovered sort of support group that we need.
We'll follow this up after.
And I went to there's a really big second-hand store in Leeds, close to where I live, at 3 floors of product. I spent hours of my life trying to find a pair of trousers that were the right style, the right fabric, the right colour, and the right leg length. I walked away from there literally after 2 hours with nothing.
Lost the will to live?
Lose
that too?
Yeah, shopping is not high on my list of things that make me, get buzzy. But I mean, I forced myself, and I just couldn't find any. So we've got this real. Again, it's not to say that these different models are not right. It's about trying to work out for that group, that segment, that individual. How do we find the right answer for them? And what we're trying to do with the work at WRAP in terms of our work on circular business models, for example, is to say there's a model that works with this segment here. There's a model that works for that segment over there. There may not be a model that fits this particular group here, but how do we find an alternative to help them minimise their footprint overall? And it's about having that flexibility.
And what do you? I think such brilliant points. I agree with all of them. What do you do if you're advising a retailer and they're in a scenario where they've established, and you agree, they've got a customer segment, in fashion, it could be any industry, where, they are maybe in that point of their life where they can now afford new clothes. As you say, they could be in a socioeconomic group previously where they're always buying secondhand. So they want to buy new clothing. But this retailer, they really want to do something impactful in terms of sustainability. So maybe they want to try and produce a bit less, but maybe it's more complicated than just durability. What do you say to them where for that customer group, secondhand isn't going to work? And they have all these multiple challenges, because you do make such a good point, around the 400 million people who suddenly would be out of work. What for people then in that segment, for example, what kind of things would you be looking at?
So we work on a full life cycle assessment approach. So we're talking about the impact the materials that go into those that the garments have. So thinking about growing cotton. Now, cotton is the most popular textile fibre that we use. Grown in 80 different countries around the world, different growing environments, all sorts of different impacts. And what we will say to our brands, that sign up to the agreement is, we provide them with information around those different materials, in terms of the greenhouse gas emissions, in terms of water footprint. But then also start talking about not just those materials and where they're coming from, but also thinking across that whole life cycle. How do they progress through the production cycle? When they get into the use phase with the consumer, what's the best material that actually extends the life of that? And it's back to that durability question. But then also thinking about at end of life, where do your products normally end up in which pile? If you're an organisation that doesn't do take back, so you're not engaging in this idea of helping consumers work out the best place to put their old clothes. If you're not doing that, then how can you influence the end of life for your customers?
Yeah.
What can you do around that? If you are doing take back, we're in the process of now developing a very strategic approach to say, right, what's the best way of doing take back? That actually means that stuff that is taken back gets directed to the right streams so we can maximise the value. And we use that term, maximise the value. And the reason we use maximise the value is because if something has no value at end of life, what do you do with it? Yeah. You might just throw it in the bin or, landfill it or whatever. And what we're talking about is if we can maximise the value of what we call post-consumer textiles, then that means we're more likely to try to get out of the residual waste stream and put it somewhere else. And I guess the really big challenge for brands and retailers is doing that full life cycle sort of review of what they're doing. And at that end of life, wouldn't it be great if we could actually bring that end of life material and bring it all the way around to the start of the process, get that circular motion going, to make sure that we're still in a position that, those 400 million workers are employed in a different type of fashion industry where they're still getting the support and the income, but they're doing it in a way that actually minimises some of the negative outputs of the process.
We had Ross Barry from Reskinned on the podcast last week, and he made a really interesting point. We were talking about design schools. He said the biggest thing that surprises him is that designers aren't taught to design with existing products. They all design from scratch, from new, from pattern. And he said, wouldn't it be great if we could just learn more of the upcycling as part of design education, so that this textile recycling or this dead stock that's floating around is already in the mindset of designers when they're coming through, or product developers when they're coming through, rather than it going straight to virgin fabrics. Let's actually look at the recycle. Let's look at that circular take back. Let's see what we can reuse and start thinking about our textiles recycling as a first port of call, rather than somewhere that's not really in their mindset at the moment. What are your thoughts on that? What do you think it would take to get us to a stage where those textile kind of recycling, all those actually come back into product development within fashion? Is it a complicated system?
It is, and I was having a conversation with colleagues literally this morning about skill set. And also, and I'm really pleased that you said designers, but actually talked about product developers, because actually designers have an important role in this. But I did product development for a very long time, and after about 10 years, I then moved into a pure sustainability role, and I started seeing a lot more of the supply chain. Bizarrely, a lot more of the supply chain doing that than I did when I was doing product development. And what I realised is the product development process and the stakeholders involved in that, if you take a really clear sort of sustainability life cycle view of product developers include designers, technologists in brands, the fabric mills, the dye houses, the spinning mills, even the cotton growers or the polyester extruders. So when we talk about this idea, and it is really important that something like 80% of the impact is locked in through product development. We have to realise, as actors in this space, that we're not the only product developers involved in making choices. So dye house compliance, when we started working on it, there were a huge range of decisions being made by the dye house manager based on the dye house manager's expertise and knowledge that had nothing at all to do with our specification of product. Nothing at all. So our product development that went into specification left this massive window of decision making that had direct impact on product quality and also environmental and social harm. So I'm not sure if this is answering your question, but that whole product development aspect is a huge joint enterprise that needs everyone to be educated on it. So having come from a design school in Leeds, we tried to build this into the curriculum. We tried to create that learning process. And we had some success, but fundamentally for a lot of our designers, a lot of our graduates that went out in the big wide world, they then get bashed around by your promotion, your development, your progression up the greasy pole is based on two things: volume sales and margin.
Oh, this is a conversation we come back to quite a lot. One of the conversations that I had, I think it was on another podcast, was around burnout and how long it takes for people to come in with absolutely the right intentions, best intentions, want to make an impact, and how long it takes them to realise that within some of these organisations it's about margin and margin improvement. And I think there was a piece of research from McKinsey, and I want to say it was in January, February of this year, something along the lines of, might be making this up, but I don't think I am because it stuck with me, something like 80% of C-level executives believe profit and margin improvement come from volume. And it's decoupling that volume from margin. It's like the only way to make more money is by making more stuff. And when you're fighting against that attitude at a very senior level, I mean, that's hard. Me
and Sue's both have been mentioning recently the news from Uniqlo, which is pretty rare among those. I mean, they're not the biggest of the fast fashion players, but if you group them within them, that I think last year was the first year they'd reported where they made less clothing, slightly less, not massively less, and also made more money. So they had done what we were just describing, which is fascinating because it does show the world, this can work. Don't get me wrong, there's lots that Uniqlo do that's pretty unique. Their brand power is unbelievable. They have a very specific offering for a very specific kind of customer. They just nail it. But it does show that even for a big business, you can decouple them. But also, just to say this, it's so interesting because a few times when you said at the beginning, Mark, that you don't want to get into the you want to try and avoid the kind of science of textiles. But what's fascinating is actually that it's almost impossible to, and also that the problem with all of this is that you need to.
Yeah.
So in the work I do, I'm very much a sort of macro trends person. So I rarely get into the science. I'm no expert. I'm an all-rounder. But I realise, particularly when I'm talking about sustainability, nothing can be solved if you don't get into the science. And then I think about these individuals going into the design world. This is the problem they face, because a lot of the potential, the real benefits and the real growth needs to come from solving those very small but important details in the supply chain science, in the textile science. But then, whether it's the CEO or the customer, that story doesn't work. It's too small, or it's too specific, or frankly, sometimes it's too boring. So it just gets lost. Isn't it?
I'd love to spend hours. I mean, in fact, I said this to one of our signatories this morning. We had a meeting with them this morning, and I said, please don't allow me to start talking about spinning cotton. Because I'll go crazy with it. I love it. I mean, going to a spinning mill and watching that process, it's just the most exciting thing for me.
I also think that not many people realise how clothes are made anymore.
Absolutely, and if I ruled the world, one of the things I would do is I take everyone to see the whole process. Yeah. To do sustainability, you need to know where stuff is coming from. To do circularity, much higher level of knowledge and expertise is needed to know that textile science. If you do not understand that in the spinning of cotton, that you have to card and comb the cotton to get it into a state that's ready for spinning, what you're missing out there is the waste component of that process. But actually, it's not waste. The vast majority of that stuff that comes out, the comber in particular, and probably the carder as well, is sold and is used somewhere else. So to really exploit circularity as a theory, you need textile science. The problem I always have with this is I get too excited about it, and I'm already sitting here going, don't ask another question about it, because it is extraordinary that... the UK in particular, the Industrial Revolution for the UK was based on textiles. Essentially, it drove textiles. So in some ways, it drove the British Empire. We know that textiles historically has been, for most countries, has been the way that they drive GDP growth and move from developing status to developed state. I mean, all sorts of stuff around this. So if we had more time to educate and explain and get that textile science out there, I think we could make some big steps forwards, but we don't. And here's the challenge, isn't it? We don't have that time, and I've used the word I don't like using, educate, because it just turns people off, all over the place.
Awareness. It's like just build awareness.
Yeah. Well, again, interesting, isn't it? When we look at the psychology around consumer behaviour, awareness is part of the process to get behavioural change. Yes. But awareness by itself does nothing. Yeah. So, and this is what I find really interesting when we start looking at younger generations, for example. They are much more aware of climate change, much more aware of the damage that is going on historically and going into the future, what we're doing to the planet. But I know awareness is only part of the story. And I also know that as young people, as they're moving through their development, they're thinking about their self-esteem, their self-identity, their position in society. And interesting enough, fashion is a really critical part of them building their self-esteem and their position in society. So we're almost saying to them, we want you to be aware of all the problems with fashion. And what they're also having to balance up with is, I want to create my identities.
How do we Patagonia dad jackets come in?
Yeah.
Exactly.
But interesting with and it's interesting with the Patagonia idea, isn't it? That again, that's a really interesting niche, and it's starting to understand, what's the scale of that, and what's the behaviour that people have around that. Because I'm absolutely certain that people who go and buy that Patagonia fleece, they'll wear it and they'll wear it brilliant. But they are going out and buying new stuff.
Oh, absolutely.
And are they applying the same level of environmental, social harm criteria to their pants and their socks and their jeans?
Totally.
And what have you? Yeah, who knows? We don't know.
And it wasn't. What's fascinating about it is it evidently isn't enough for most consumers for it to just be a good thing. It's what I was describing is that it's not just a good thing. It's that there's sort of this cultural moment. And people are doing it partly to share, partly to show they're part of this thing. They weren't doing it maybe 5 years before when it was just a good thing to do. Oh, I should buy an old Patagonia because it's a good product and it lasts a long time, it's ideal and it's cheaper and blah, blah, blah. They weren't doing it then. It had to wait for a moment where it felt culturally relevant as part of this kind of identity building thing we all do. So you're so right, and that's why this is so complicated.
Yeah.
It isn't just enough for it to be like the right thing to do ethically. It also has to work commercially, culturally, whatever else.
Yeah, and you have, fashion is littered with these sort of fads that come in and then disappear, and some of them are on a long wavelength, some of them on a much shorter time frame. And what we have to do in terms of sustainability is not have sustainability as a fad. What we need to get to is a position where, irrespective of what the fad is, irrespective of what the sort of latest thing is, sustainability is built in as a foundational
Just a
part.
way of working.
Yeah, it's a way of working. I am going to deliver this product that will deliver the margin that we want, that delivers the volume that we want, and does the sustainability. Now, historically, when I was working in the industry, and I think it's the case for a lot of organisations now, it is get the product right in terms of selling it, in terms
What's
of
the next
fashion.
bestseller?
Yeah, and then let's retrofit some sustainability
Yes.
into that, and you go, okay. And I did it myself. I've seen other people do it, and you go, well, my margin is already fixed. I know what my volume is planned to be, and all of a sudden that means you've got very limited levers you can pull in terms of how do you make that a sustainable product offer in terms of materials and processes and how durable it is and what people do at end of life. It becomes really difficult to actually do that. So I did famously say out loud to one of my line managers some years ago, I'm not very good at managing my career path, and this was one of the mistakes I made. I said, he said, where do you want to be in 5 years' time? And I said, I want this role of sustainability manager to be redundant. Because why would you need a sustainability manager if it is business as usual?
I think that's the role of any really great department head, is make yourself redundant. Like bring in the right people with right ideas that make you redundant in the process and you move into a different space. And I think that's the way most of us would hopefully think when we're in that role. It's like, it's bring in the right people and it just becomes business as usual. I think one of the things that we often discuss is how perception-wise, how much easier it is for startups and smaller brands to come in and do the right thing from the start. But also, on the flip side, just how difficult that is when they start to scale, and how difficult that is when you're in one of these huge retailers. I use the phrase like turning the oil tanker because that's often what it feels like for people in that role. But where have you seen, are there any companies that you've seen that you admire or that you think are doing the right things for the right reasons or don't always get it right, but you know what, they're trying for what, and what can we learn from those?
I think you've hit the nail on the head in terms of trying. And one of the things I did with my early career, I've said this. I said this at my job interview for RAP actually. I said I was asked, what's your proudest thing? And I said, I've made a lot of mistakes. I made so many mistakes in trying to do the right thing, but it was the trying that was the most important thing, and. We're at a position now where I'm going to modify the trying thing slightly. So, when I started on this, there was no blueprint. There was no book on how you do this. And you just have to suck it and see and try it and take the risk. And I was, again, lucky, with senior management that just went, oh, it's him again. Well, let's see where this one goes. And they let me go a bit AWOL with stuff. Now we're in a position where I think people should be trying stuff. But we need to move away from reinventing the wheel. Some of the stuff that we've seen in terms of... So RAP have been doing stuff on textiles since 2011-12. And in that process, evolving, learning, building expertise. And, what we see time after time after time is people want to reinvent the wheel. They want to go, here's a problem, we're going to go out and fix it.
And fix it for everyone.
Well, actually, they're thinking they can just fix it for themselves. We are going to go and fix this problem. And, we find it really difficult to engage with these organisations and say, we can help you with that because the problem that you're facing is the same as everyone else, and we've done a lot of work on this. Now, it might be that your supply chain is in a different location, or it might be that you have a different type of product and a different consumer. But fundamentally, if we're talking about the use of polyester or talking about how we make cotton more sustainable, we've got a lot of the answers already. And they're not just ours. We're a bit of an organisation, a bit of a magpie. We gather all of this stuff together and we build a sort of a toolkit. So we've got this real challenge of, and I don't know whether it's based on not invented here, but there's this real challenge of reinventing the wheel for a lot of these organisations where we're going, we've got a lot of the answers. We can accelerate your process of learning if you let us in the door and allow us to do that.
I think it's interesting. There's one very big retailer that we've been trying to get onto Source Fashion to speak at the show for a little while and share some of the work that they've been doing. Because we think they've got some fantastic learnings that other people can actually learn on because they're in that journey, but they don't necessarily have the resources of this very large, huge business that everyone's worked with. And they have said no because they don't want to share the PR. And I'll tell you about that. I'll tell you who that is later. But they actually want to be able to be seen to be solving a problem that they are solving that problem. And I, in my very blunt way, I said something along the lines of, but do you not understand how important it is that you share your progress? Because the problems you had 2 years ago are the problems that other people are going through now. And by keeping all of this behind closed doors, it's actually not helping solve the bigger problem, which is actually, in order to make this go faster, people need to start really collaborating. And I don't for the life of me quite understand why fashion, and we work across lots of different retail sectors, but there seems to be a lot less true collaboration in fashion than in other places.
Yeah. I think I know which brand you're talking about.
Oh, okay.
I
we'll
think
chat
I
later.
do. Yeah, we'll chat later. I'm not going to put a lot of money on it, but what we do in terms of wrap and the focus that we have, it's pre-competitive space.
Yeah.
And every brand I've ever spoken to and worked with, if we talk about any issue around sustainability within fashion and textiles, every single organisation I've spoken to has gone, we can't do this by ourselves.
Yeah.
We need that collaboration. So, and let's talk about supply chains as an example.
Even down to labour rights in a particular country.
Absolutely.
Like, they band together, they can make a change.
Yes, yeah.
They don't, they can't.
And what I find really interesting is I no longer talk about a brand supply chain. There are a set of supply chains out there that supply lots of brands.
Yes.
And I've just had a fire extinguisher moment. So I'll explain. So I used to go out and visit factories, and we used to do a lot of work on compliance. And I remember having a conversation with a mill in Turkey, and this guy was he was exhausted. He'd had so many visits from brands, and he just cut loose. He said, "I'm sick and tired of you brands coming along and telling me about my bloody fire extinguishers." I was going, what? He said, well, I had a sports brand from the US here, and my fire extinguisher had to be 1.2 metres off the floor over there. And then I had, one of your competitors in the UK, and they said it had to be on the floor over there. And then you come along with this idea of, what am I supposed to do? And it struck me how complicated all of this stuff is. What we're saying to the supply chains or the supply networks, if we do an individual approach, is for each brand, you've got to do your own thing. And what you end up there is, the dye house manager is completely exhausted and can't do the thing that he's supposed to do, which is minimise water, minimise greenhouse gas emissions, protect his workers, don't use harmful chemicals. That's what we want. So what we are now seeing, and the textile work that we do is pre-competitive, and what we're doing is about collaboration. We have to work very gently but firmly and say, this is for the greater good. And we need you, brands and retailers, to come to the party and share.
Yeah.
And what we can't have is that sort of, going on the coattails and freeloading.
Yes.
But we're also seeing it's not just us that's doing it. We're seeing it with chemical compliance, with ethical compliance. We're seeing it with sourcing timber, with sourcing cotton. And that's, for me, again, is that little bit of you've got to try it. You've got to try and do something with your supply chain, but don't reinvent the wheel.
Yeah.
If you want to do something chemical compliance, go and talk to them. If you want to do something around, if you're based in the UK and want to do something on greenhouse gas emissions and water and waste, come and talk to RAP. We've got a whole pile of stuff, essentially is free. But if you want to go deeper with it, if you want to accelerate, then there's opportunities that we can look at in terms of doing that.
Yeah.
And it's about learning. So we've had a couple of organisations that we work with that are basically going, we want to own this space.
Yeah. We want to win. Yeah.
We want to win.
Yeah.
And, I go, brilliant. Because what you always need in the mix is innovators.
Yeah.
You always need
First
someone
movers.
that is first movers who basically say to the rest of the market,
We're off.
We're off. We're going to do this better than you.
Yeah.
And of course, what will happen? They'll be better for a couple of years, and then someone else comes along. And we just need that constant, we want to keep
get
building
going.
that competitive nature in our pre-competitive space to move things on.
Yes.
And that's that really delicate
Yeah.
balance of trying to do these things,
Yeah,
I
it's
guess.
it's this whole thing is what I always mention it, but what makes it something Tony's Chocolate Only do so fascinating, that they changed the chocolate supply chain, or they made their own version of it, but then they immediately made it accessible to other chocolate companies. That's one of the first things they did. And I love that, because I just haven't seen that in many industries. And also, to the point of businesses wanting, it's not like Tony's Chocolate Only haven't won from that. Everyone loves them for it. And it hasn't changed, if anything.
And
it's
they
given
get
them
to
even more
price their chocolate a little bit higher than everyone
higher.
else.
It's given them great brand power.
Yeah.
They make it part of their branding. So all that collaboration has just helped them even more.
Yeah, and you don't see that. You don't see them talking on their packets. Big, loud, and proud. Look at what
Yeah,
we
yeah,
do with the
yeah.
supply chain.
Yeah.
What they're talking about is we make really good chocolate.
Absolutely.
You know,
And it's
you'll
still
love
the
it.
reason people buy it. This
Absolutely,
is what I say.
yeah.
It's mainly so. To your point, I always say, if anyone will ever listen to me about this, I always say that. I say it does happen in some.
There's 3 listeners to this, right? This
Yeah.
podcast, right?
Exactly. And I think that's the thing, is that it does. It's easy to think as well that this doesn't happen. This collaboration at a high level, it does happen.
Yeah.
And it is possible.
And I don't know about Tony, so it's an interesting one to get your head about and say, well, why would they do that? And I can see all sorts of interesting supply chain negotiations. You work with us, and all of a sudden we'll bring other people into your sphere, and that's that innovative thinking that we need to apply to sustainability as well. Of going, how do we make this work? That we still have our unique position in the market, we still have growth, but what we've done is decoupled. And you mentioned decoupling earlier. We've decoupled environmental social harm from growth. Do we have a problem with growth per se? Well, if it comes with poisoning of rivers, exploitation of children, challenges in terms of slave labour, greenhouse gas emissions and everything else goes with it. If that's what growth comes with, then we have to do something different. But if we can find an alternative to growth that delivers business benefit, but at the same time is not only avoiding those bad practices, but regeneration within that environment, then, we're into winner. Now, it's really easy for me to say that. And as I've said it, I'm just like going, why haven't we done this before? And then you go,
Sounds so easy.
it sounds so easy. So regeneration, regenerative agriculture, for example. I mean, how do you do that with cotton? That's one thing. And then a big area that we're focusing on, really want to get at, trying to get that system change. So we're all about system change. Is fibre to fibre recycling. So, we've got our hierarchy. So if a product is still reusable, reuse it. If you can find a way of remanufacturing, or what we would call upcycling in textiles, upcycle it. We then get into recycling. And recycling is about how you extract that raw material. You want to get that raw material out of that product and put it back into the system. It's almost the holy grail. I've talked about... I studied physics at university. I don't know how I've ended up here, but I
did
studied
computer
physics.
science. No idea how I
There we
ended up
go.
here.
So yeah. Don't come to us for career advice, because who knows? So I remember learning about nuclear fusion. Yes, nuclear fusion. And it was just round the corner. Nuclear fusion, clean, cheap electricity, fantastic. That was in 1980, something or other, a long time ago. And here we are, still waiting for nuclear fusion. Chemical recycling of textiles, fibre to fibre recycling, sort of feels a little bit like that at the moment.
Yeah.
There's lots of technologies out there, but none of them have been commercialised. But if we can get to a position where we can do that fibre to fibre recycling, where we can actually just keep things going round in these cycles, that would be, that would resolve an awful lot of problems for us if, I have to correct myself here, if that recycling is lower impact than virgin production.
And I think that's part of the challenge, is my very layman's understanding of fibre to fibre, is that it's much easier to do when it's 100% of a certain material. But the minute that starts being blended, as in it's got man-made fibres in it, it's got a few different blends of different things, it's incredibly complex. And actually trying to get that to a level where it's commercially viable to get back in and it's as cheap as that virgin material is where the challenge is. And I think you always think when you have something that's new and innovative, it's always going to be more expensive at the start. But is there a path to bring that cost of that fibre to fibre down to a level where it becomes competitive, or where it could be competitive over, say, 5 or 10 years, and you've just got to invest in it now because there's a long-term payoff?
And here's the complexity again. I was reading something the other day about how someone was looking at contrasting how different T-shirts from different companies biodegraded. And, of course, one of the things they found out was the one that was a mix of synthetics and cotton, a Uniqlo
Just
product,
lasted longer.
Lasted longer. It was in perfect condition 15 years later. So when it did get to the end of life, problem, because it's really difficult to extract, and the cotton one's better, but actually the person would keep the mixed material one for longer, and then I was just like, oh god, yeah.
This is a complexity, isn't it?
Yeah.
So we've done a big piece of work with University of Leeds looking at durability of T-shirts, and there's going to be a publication out fairly soon. Looked at 47 different T-shirts, and the complexity of stuff that you get thrown out from that is really interesting. It's a price. So if we look at the performance, the durability of those products, and we rank them in terms of at the top the most durable and at the bottom the least durable. And then we put the price against those products. So the top group, 10 products, they're sitting around somewhere between sort of £5 to £10, maybe up to £20. So you think, okay, so price range, £20 for a T-shirt, it's a bit toppy for me, but, it sort of feels, okay, that's interesting. You then look at the bottom of the durability scale and the price points are exactly the same.
Yeah.
And then not actually in the middle, just below the middle, just below the average, we've got a T-shirt that is close on £400 recommended retail price. That is sitting just below the average for durability. And you're like going, what on earth is going on there? And it's not new for us. We've been looking at this for a long time. Price and durability, no correlation at all. But interesting enough, and going back to the textile science stuff, I promise I won't do too long on this. The textile science, when you actually look at those individual products and look at the composition of them, and you look at there'll be a cotton poly, there'll be a cotton with lycra, there'll be a cotton with elastane. There'll be a pile of them at the top that look really good, and almost exactly the same composition at the bottom. They look really bad. So you can't even use composition to then say this is more durable or less durable. And the reason you can't do that is because the way you put the cotton yarn together with the polyester and with the nylon or whatever it is very, very complex.
Of course.
So the whole durability thing in terms of the textile science and trying to work out how it all fits together is really complicated. Yeah. And fundamentally, some of the stuff that we're looking at now in terms of our durability roadmap for our work at WRAP is saying we know how product can be manufactured that retains that durable function, but it doesn't have to cost a huge amount of money and doesn't have to cost the earth either. But what that takes is an awful lot of rethinking and recasting how you operate.
Yeah.
And I talked about the product development not being the designer only.
Yeah.
That recasting is all the way up the supply chain to the cotton farmers or the polyester extruders, as well as thinking about as a brand am I going to do take back? If I am, how am I going to do it? When I get this stuff back, how do we design it for deconstruction or recycling? So there's that whole recasting of the model is really changing, and that's what we're trying to do at WRAP, is going, that system from growing the cotton to end of life needs a complete redesign.
Yeah.
And what skills and what knowledge do we need to be able to do that?
Because what they do is their best designers in stores will take old like 5 or 6 different pairs and mix and match bits from each of them and create something then unique. That's the whole point. When you wear them, you'll be told, well, that is slightly different to any other Golden Goose pair of sneakers on the market, and it will be the most expensive pair.
Yeah.
Veya are starting to do it in their stores. They have a price list in their store, like they have like a cobbler in there who'll remake your shoes. Most of it's cheap, fix this, fix that, and then at the bottom they'll have something that's called something like a VIP Veya, like £300.
Yeah.
Because they're going to give it something unique. And you're reminded, upcycling isn't just necessarily it could be the most expensive thing you could do, and for a little chunk of your...
But you tell the story,
options.
right?
Yeah, it's not going to work for everyone, but it will solve... And in fact, there'll be some people who wouldn't buy second-hand, who would buy those more expensive ones, because they'll go, oh, actually, that's cool, I'm into that. I don't want to buy cheap stuff from a charity shop, but I'd buy the £300 pair of, and that brings them into that.
And it's interesting, I left the retail environment because I just didn't understand consumers. I just thought they were all being polite bonkers, absolutely mad as a box of frogs.
They absolutely are.
Because you would say you'd get the market research and say 78.5% of your customer base want to be green, and you go, right, I create the green thing, I made it really sustainable, and it bombs, doesn't it? And you go, you do it once, and then you do it twice, and then you think, I've done this 17 times now. What in it? This doesn't make sense. So I left retail to go to an academic role, and part of the reason was to study consumer behaviour. And this is not really deep theory at all. This has been known for a long time. We talk about satisfying needs and understanding what the needs are that consumer has. And fashion is really good at ticking boxes in terms of certain needs. It's very good at satisfying a need around, for example, I want to look completely unique and different. And the reason I want to look like that is because I want to show my status. And the best way to show status is I've got something really different and unique. Yeah. So I'm willing to pay whatever for it. There will be other people who say, and this is probably me, I have no idea about design. I have no idea what I look like. I just want someone to give me something that makes me look okay. I get through. And, that is my need. And there'll be others out there that, just like going, right at the other end of the scale. I want to wear some clothes that are going to last forever. Yeah. That's my need. Yeah. Simple as. Yeah. I don't care about anything else. I'm thinking, maybe, that might be my dad, for example. Yeah. And he doesn't engage in the shopping process. It's my mum does it. Yeah.
I'm sure he is not the only one in that place.
I think you're probably right. There's quite a few. But again, when we go back to this idea of product development and, recasting the model and redesigning the system, by understanding needs and what satisfaction, how do we satisfy that need, is a critical part. Yeah. And if we don't find the right need, then if we're not satisfied it, and we create a tension within that individual who goes, I feel uncomfortable with where I am with my fashion. I want to go and buy something new because I'm not in the right place. And consumerism is driven by that tension. Yes. Yeah. And it's about addressing that tension. Now, you don't see that in the stores, do you? We're going, we can help you with your tension. It's all hidden in the mix. Absolutely. Of this. And of course, brands are really good at creating tension. And going, hey, here's the latest fashion trend.
Creating the want.
Yeah. And of course, they'll be using all of these fantastic, sexy models and going, you could look like this model if you just tried a bit harder by buying this thing. It's all of that. Absolutely. So and I know it's always really interesting when we have the debates about sustainability. It's the brand's fault, or someone blames the consumers, and actually it's a mishmash of the whole thing.
It's a systemic issue. Yeah. Mark, going back to the main piece of work that you're doing at the moment around Textile 2030. Where do you think we're winning? Where do you think brands are getting it? What do you think's moving forward at a way that you're almost happy with?
I am never happy.
That's why I said almost.
Almost. I'm not even almost happy.
Satisfied?
I'm constantly challenging myself and others, so we're just not moving fast enough.
But that's needed in this space.
Yeah, exactly. So what I find really interesting is we're seeing a lot of organisations now recognising collaboration and the power of collaboration. We're also seeing a lot of organisations recognising the system approach that we're talking about. And I'm saying this out loud, and in my brain I'm going, oh, it's too slow. But the fact that we're getting that system thinking going on now, that people are not going, oh, I just need to grow cotton in a better way and my job's done, or I just need to be using recycled pop bottles, my job is done. Actually getting this real clear system transformation, this theory of system change. And again, RAP is really trying to focus on system transformation. So it's great that we're seeing a lot of our brands going, you know what, we need to be thinking about what we need to do now, what we need to be doing in 2 years, what we need to be doing in 5 years for that system redesign. So that's great, and that collaboration that's going around it. And we are also seeing individual brands really taking that risk of going, we haven't done this before. No one's done this before. Suck it and see. Let's see what happens with it. Of course, there's all of that good stuff that I can talk about. I am very challenged by how people perceive the industry and progress within the industry. What I find really challenging for making progress on this sort of stuff is ill-informed media stories, for example, that go, this is a binary issue. It's either good or it's bad. For example, exporting textile materials to global south countries, sub-Saharan Africa or South America. And it is painted as either being good or painted as being really bad. And that really unpicks all of the hard work that we try to do around system dynamics of going, this could be really good if it's done in the right way. How do we know what the right way is? Well, we have to engage with the global south, the communities that deal with this stuff, to understand what they want and how it's valuable to them, to then work out we should be sending this stuff but not sending that stuff. That way we can shift the dial from it being, we don't know what's going on there, to actually saying this has been inclusively designed and we're getting benefit. We're not getting benefit in the global north. Global south is getting the benefit. So, some of those myths that exist around fashion really challenging.
I think the more you learn, the more you realise just how much grey space there is. And it's really about just always having, my personal opinion, is that it's just always trying to have the best intentions and do the right thing for the right people. Problems are rarely black and white. Last question. What's the thing that you're most excited about in this space?
Wow, there's a question and a half. I'm going to have a think about that. Can you give me half an hour and I'll come back?
No, you're on the spot.
I think there's some interesting dynamics going on policy-wise. Now that doesn't sound sexy, right? I mean,
No, it does.
Yeah. And
it's been lacking for a long time.
And I guess to your point, it's been lacking for a long time. There's a bit of a vacuum there, isn't there, in terms of good policy around not just textiles, but just that wider picture about how we manage consumption and what we do around it. And I did get really excited about some of the stuff that was coming out of Europe around
circular economy principles.
Circular economy principles. Some of the work being done around durability, and we haven't mentioned it yet. EPR.
I think a few people are aware of what that is, but it's definitely coming through.
Extended producer responsibility. I know I've just said that, and now I'm doing the thing that I'm sure my team hate me do. And I go, that's really exciting, and then I go, actually, it's horrible. It's not right. And what we're seeing with some of the policy stuff that's coming out around durability, for example, in Europe, it feels like that those policy positions on durability that had really high aspirations are now being watered down. They're going backwards. And we're building some evidence base to support this. So although I'm quite excited about policy, I'm also really nervous that if we're not careful, what we end up with is a set of policies that just reinforce business as usual.
Yeah.
And what we need is that innovation around policy, progressive policy. And now I'm sitting here thinking, that's our job. So in terms of what we do at RAP and in terms of these collaborative, things that we do.
The reality is policy comes through lobbying.
Well, but policy. So we
and very basic.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We don't do lobbying, but what we should be doing is providing the evidence to policy and industry to say, if you do these things in this system setup, we believe with the evidence that we've created that a policy approach has the opportunity to deliver improvements. And that is actually I keep flipping and flopping on this, don't I? I think that's really interesting and exciting.
I think it's exciting. I feel that from a policy perspective and a regulation perspective, it's been a bit like the Wild West. Just every time it looks like something's going to get passed, it gets put on the back burner or it gets delayed. And I think even in my little kind of view of it, I just haven't seen any new policies or changes for maybe 5 or 10. I can't remember the last environmental policy that was around sustainability and consumer goods and fashion in the UK. And it seems that everything kind of gets tied up. But the fact that now EPR looks like it is going to come through, and there are other policies that are coming through, even if it's watered down, it's a place to start. I think we'd all love to see policies that come in and can really provide an impetus to change. But to go back to your point you've made quite a few times, it's not always a black and white question. And I think sometimes you'd like it to be so that there's a hard stance and we can move forward. But it's a pretty complex system.
And that, let's take EPR as an example. I mean, it is the hot topic at the moment, in terms of policies. We have to remind ourselves that the end game isn't EPR. The end game is a more sustainable system design. Now, EPR can provide the opportunity, some levers, to do two things. One is to drive behaviour change. So if we have this eco-modulation around EPR, you can drive behaviour change within brands and retailers, as well as the recycling community. So EPR is good for that. EPR is also creates the opportunity of bringing in a funding stream that we don't have at the moment. We don't have a funding stream coming from anywhere else to allow us to innovate and to fix critical parts of the system. So what we call the R&R community, the reuse, recycling, the sorting, the collections industry within the UK and globally is close to critical failure. Yeah. So EPR can provide that behaviour change and the funding stream. But EPR isn't the thing that we want to get to. EPR is, as I say, is part of that process to get to a sustainable system for fashion. And as long as we keep remembering that when we're talking about policy and when we're talking about taking action and when we as RAP are doing the collective work that we're doing, that collaborative work, as long as we keep remembering that circularity is a stepping stone to get to a more sustainable system. Yeah. As long as we keep remembering that, then hopefully we'll keep ourselves on track. Yeah. But of course, I said at the very start, we are running out of time, and we need that acceleration.
Need bravery.
Absolutely bravery. We need brands and retailers. We need stakeholders, all sorts of different people to work with us. We can hold their hands and take that leap. And let's see where we get to. And it's not about leaping into the darkness, without any sort of insight. But, we've got a map. We've got a process or a system idea that we're testing out with evidence. We just need those innovative organisations to go, we'll give it a go.
Well, that feels like a great place to finish, actually. It's kind of, I think, give it a go and try, just carry on trying. Mark, thank you so much. Usually I'd say this is the one thing I've learnt from this session, but I think that was a really fascinating conversation on many different levels. And I think a lot of people listening will have taken quite a lot of nuggets and kernels of ideas or thoughts away from it as well. So thank you for coming in to talk to us.
Thanks so much, Mark.
No, thank you very much. Really enjoyed it.
Cool. Thank you.